Farmer Hans rubbed his eyes. Was he seeing that right? Everywhere, as far as he could see, he saw strange white objects on his farmland. When he checked a few days ago, everything was fine. When he got closer, he realized the white objects were in fact hundreds of eggs. Not much later, he heard a strange but familiar noise. They jumped in front of the tractor and refused to move. They didn't understand how their father could be so heartless and destroy a living thing like that. To calm down his girls, Hans suggested something else that completely shocked them. But what suggested Hans? And why did he burst into tears when they finally hatched? But before we start, make sure to subscribe if you haven't and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. Being a farmer had always been Hans's dream, and now that he had made it a reality, nothing could go wrong. Hans has 2 daughters, Mary and Giselle, with his wife Bonnie. They live on a farm where they grow vegetables like corn and herd sheep. Hans woke up as normal and put on his overalls. He always lets his wife sleep in a little longer than he does. He made breakfast for the family so they could eat as soon as they woke up. When everyone finished their breakfast, it was finally time for Hans to step outside and feed his animals. He had his buckets of food ready and walked to the chicken coop. His chickens acted differently than usual. They ran around the coop, and it seemed like they were scared of something. But what? Hans then noticed something else. One chicken was missing from the coop. Where could he be? Oh no, he thought. This can't be good. Hans knew exactly what this meant. He ran inside to get a towel and a box and put the deceased chicken in there. How could it have died so suddenly? He continued his round and walked to the pigs. They were louder than usual. What is going on here? Then suddenly he heard strange sound. He listened carefully but couldn't place where it came from. After feeding all his animals, he went into the barn to get his tractor ready. So he hooked the machine to his tractor and opened the barn doors, unknowing about what was happening under his tractor. He was about to drive away when he heard a loud scream. It was Mary. "Dad, stop! There is something on the ground there." She looked as if she had seen a ghost. Mary pointed toward the tractor's wheels, and as soon as Hans saw it, he jumped off. A sick little kitten was on the ground in front of one of the tractor's wheels. Hans would have run over the poor animal if Mary hadn't come outside. The kitten had strange bleeding marks on its ears and was obviously malnourished. Mary immediately offered to care for the animal, and Hans agreed. He had never seen marks like that before on an animal. It was probably from one of his barn cats, but they were usually very friendly. Before he could even wrap his head around what had happened, his other daughter Giselle came running outside the house. "Dad, you have to look at the cornfield," she screamed. "Yes, Giselle, I was on my way now." Hans sighed. Hans got back up on his tractor and drove to the field. It was right across from his home, so it wasn't far. He noticed small white dots in the distance, but didn't think much of it until he came closer. What in the world was this? "What is this, Dad?" Giselle asked. Hans wished he could answer her, but he was just as baffled as her. Where did all his corn go? Mary and Bonnie also came running toward the field, and their mouths fell open when they arrived. "Eggs?" Bonnie said, stunned. Hans hears the same sound he has been hearing all morning. It came from the field all this time. It looked like the eggs were almost ready to hatch. But Hans wanted to get rid of them, so he got up on his tractor until his girls intervened. They jumped in front of the tractor and refused to move. Hans suggested something else to calm down his girls that completely shocked them. "Well, girls, the crops aren't savable anymore, but maybe we can still save the eggs," Hans said. The girls' faces lit up and they jumped in the air of joy. But they had to figure out how to keep all the eggs warm at once. There were about 20 eggs scattered around the field. Hans was scared something would happen to the eggs if they moved them, so he was thinking of a different idea. He suggested they put a large black tarp over the eggs. This way they keep dry if it starts to rain, and the tarp would keep them warm under the sun. Bonnie wasn't as enthusiastic as the girls. She looked worryingly at all the eggs and wondered from what animal they came and how they got here. What if they were snake eggs? The following morning, Hans woke up to a weird noise, but it wasn't the same as yesterday. This time it sounded more like giggles. Within a second, Hans knew what it was and he shot up. He ran to the window and looked at the field. "You've got to be kidding me." His thoughts turned out to be true. His girls had woken up before him and went to the eggs. "It's 4 a.m, Hans said out loud, waking his wife. Bonnie hurried out of bed and ran downstairs. Mary and Giselle's smiles faded as they looked at their angry mom approaching. they were their babies. But as soon as Bonnie saw what her girls had been doing, her anger turned into awe. Giselle and Mary brought straw and hay from the barn to the eggs and built a little nest around each of them. This melted Bonnie's heart, and instead of yelling, she praised her daughters for taking such good care of the eggs. Then suddenly they heard a loud crack. The girls jumped up in shock, thinking they had smashed one of them, but it was something else. Giselle looked closely at one of the eggs and noticed a big crack in its shell. She screamed with joy and held it up for Mary to see. More eggs started to crack, and it could be any minute until they began hatching. On the fourth day, it was finally time. Hans went to check on the eggs when he noticed one was already empty. He frantically looked around him, but the baby was nowhere to be found. The wait felt longer than expected, and the girls almost lost their patience when finally 2 more eggs started to move. They cracked and shifted. Slowly but surely, a little animal came out. They have never seen anything like this before. Hans couldn't believe his eyes. Out of all the animals, he never imagined these to come out of the eggs. He burst out crying when his wife arrived. She asked what was wrong, and he pointed at the animals. Bonnie immediately knew what was going on and comforted her husband. The animals were little baby peacocks. Hans always cared for peacocks when he was little. He even had his own peacock, who was his best friend. After it died, he never cared for a peacock again, until now. It seemed like a miracle, but this is not everything. Hans couldn't stand giving the animals away and wanted to keep them all, but Bonnie disagreed. There wasn't enough room on their farm for 20 peacocks, so they decided to do something else instead. That was the only option, and Hans knew this. Bonnie and Hans kept 2 peacocks on their own farm and brought the other 18 animals to a peacock sanctuary. There they had all the freedom they deserved and would get the best care, and the girls also loved taking care of the peacock.